All right, our recording has begun. So welcome everyone again to our Partner with Us series today. Today we are so thrilled to present our March edition of Partner with Us, Cultivating Care. Before I push us back to our amazing speakers, on our next slide we have our mission of Church World Service. We are making a concerted effort to message that out to all folks throughout all of our presentations and communications. So as a reminder, Church World Service is a faith-based organization transforming communities around the globe through just and sustainable responses to hunger, poverty, displacement, and disaster. Our vision being a world where all have food, voice, and a safe place to call home. So today I'm so thrilled to introduce two of our incredible panelists. I'll actually ask you both to introduce yourselves again once you prior to speaking, just so that we have that in our recording. But I will pass off, I believe, to Danielle first.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And again, good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for being with us today. Just to introduce myself again, I'm Danielle Roth. I am Church World Services Gender-Based Violence Senior Specialist, and I provide support to CWS's programs both in the United States and our work with newcomers and also in our international programs. So we'll talk a bit about both of those and what that looks like today. So our focus today is on cultivating care and what CWS's approach is to protection for at-risk communities and underserved folks, and how our faith communities, all of you, can partner with us to promote the protection of underserved and vulnerable communities. Okay, next, please. Great. So our objectives for today are really to share with you a bit about what CWS's protection approaches look like globally. What are we doing? And then also to share some strategies that faith leaders and faith communities can use in the own work that you're doing in supporting newcomers and others in your community for protection. Next. And we'll also share some strategies on how you can advocate for and include protection work in the wider community settings that you're working in. Next. All right, so the question of the hour, you might be asking yourself, well, what is protection? It's a kind of a big term. And I think to many people, it can be a bit of a difficult term or an amorphous term. It can mean anything and everything. It's quite broad. But really, just to simplify it for all of us, we're really just talking about safety, making sure people aren't in violent situations, aren't at risk of violence, making sure people are well socially, emotionally. Wellness is a really important aspect of protection, and that people are able to live with dignity, to have their basic needs met. And, protection is really a framework or a program approach that recognizes that certain groups might be particularly vulnerable, either by nature of their experiences or their identities, to various types of risks. And we want to help them to advocate, to respond, and empower them in that sense. Next, please. Great. So our protection work is guided by 4 guiding principles. And so I'm just going to read them to you, but then I want to give you a really, I think, a simple example to illustrate what we mean by them. But the first one we call prioritizing safety and dignity and avoiding causing harm. So this really is about making sure that any work that we do with communities that are marginalized or at risk, that we're making sure that our impact as an organization, as a faith community, as CWS, is not causing unintended harm. So that we're really kind of thought through and been strategic. Okay, we really want to make sure that when we distribute this kit or when we give this food, that it's safe, that it's not putting people at risk, that everyone has access. We want to prioritize meaningful access. So pay attention to folks who might have barriers to that, like people with disabilities, for example, people who don't speak the majority languages in the countries we're from, or in the US in English. We have accountability and feedback mechanisms. This is really asking people for their input, showing them that we value their perspective, asking kind of what they want to see change, how they experienced a service that we offered. And the next one is participation and empowerment, really how we're helping people to have self-protective strategies to take care of themselves. And because protection can be a bit of an abstract concept, I wanted to use an example, a really simple example. But I know a lot of the faith communities in the US have such a rich history of welcoming newcomers. And in welcoming newcomers, one of the things we might do is we might share a meal. You know, food is the cultural currency for so many of us. It binds us, it unites us. So how would these principles apply if we're sharing a meal, just to kind of make it a bit less abstract for you all? So when we're sharing a meal together, of course, we're going to make sure that our food is hot, that it's safe, that no one's going to get sick from the food, right? That it's fresh, those sorts of things, that in delivering that food and having that meal together, we all feel good about that food afterwards. And in hosting a meal together, we want to make sure everyone can come. We want to make sure, you know, a child with a disability who uses a wheelchair can also enter our building if there's stairs or if there's another barrier for them. We want to ask folks, how was it? Was it good? Would you like to have eaten something else? And what would you do differently next time for this meal? And then if folks are showing their appreciation and excitement for the food and sharing about their, you know, maybe they're cooks or they have a culinary history, for example, how can we say, oh, let's connect you? There's a great institute to learn about cooking, or how can we support you to start your own culinary business? So that participation and empowerment piece. It's a simplistic example, but I hope it helps to make a little bit more real what we mean when we say protection and the protection principles. So let's go to the next slide, please. Great. Okay, so you might be wondering, like, okay, why protection? Like, why does this matter? Why now? So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the pressing priorities of our time here in 2024. So we're at a time in the world with really major challenges. I mean, it's not unique in history that we have global challenges, but the number of them, the intensity, the duration is really unprecedented. So in 2024, you know, according to United Nations, there are 300 million people who will need humanitarian assistance. So if just to take for an example, our population in the United States is 330 million people, roughly. So imagine 90% of our population needing dire humanitarian assistance in 2024. That's what we're looking at. People are on the move. They're fleeing conflict. They're forced from their homes due to natural disaster, due to the impacts of climate change. The number of people living outside their countries, according to the World Bank, is 184 million people. And in 2022, it's the most recent numbers I think we have, 71 million people were internally displaced, so had to leave their homes in their own country and are living somewhere else. There's been an increase in incidents, duration, severity of conflicts that are, I think, filling many of our news feeds we hear about every day, like Gaza or Ukraine. But there are those that maybe aren't entering our periphery, such as Sudan, ongoing needs in Syria, Myanmar, neglected crises like the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The UN reports that almost 1 child in 5 globally is fleeing a conflict zone or living in one. We're seeing increased natural disasters and weather events, tropical cyclones, wildfires in Europe, the devastation that was brought on by the storm in Libya, and just communities needing to move, react, losing their livelihoods because of the impacts of climate change. There's also increased disease outbreaks. We saw in 2023, 29 countries reported cholera outbreaks. And there's increasing food insecurity, people not being able to access food or not enough food for survival. They're seeing increased child wasting, but there are 258 million people across 58 countries that are experiencing food insecurity in 2023. So that's pretty major. All of that to say, that's why protection matters. So let's go to the next slide. Thanks. So what are we doing? How is CWS rising to the challenges of our time? So we're working with the US government to support and welcome refugees in a variety of ways, but that work starts in East Africa, in Kenya, but also in Uganda and Tanzania and South Africa and other places, where we're supporting the US government to process refugee applications, but we're also preparing refugees themselves who are going to be coming to the US to learn about what life will be like and to prepare them for that transition, which is a really big one. We also know that there are many unaccompanied and separated children who are fleeing violence in their home countries, and they're seeking refuge in the US. So we're supporting them to ensure they have safe spaces to stay in families, and that we're helping them to access services as they transition to their life here for however long that may be. We're also working with children and women and faith actors in Latin America to support giving them life skills and prevent recruitment into urban violence activities such as gangs and others. The next slide, please. We are connecting people with the support services that are available. So we do have a very rich history at CWS of welcome. We do provide support to refugees and other newcomers, both in their first 90 days and to some after. We're supporting them to help find jobs, to access English classes, provide cultural orientation, to help them find housing in what is quite a period of transition, rapid transition and change. But we also provide case management for folks who need a little bit extra help. If you haven't heard of case management, it's based on a social work model where basically we help folks get connected to services, and it's based on an assessment of their needs and individual risks that they might be facing. In Europe, we're working with Roma populations. They are a very widely marginalized group across Europe. And we're supporting a partner through the operation of drop-in centers for street-associated youth. So helping to get them a warm meal, but also have the opportunity to build skills and have a safe space. Go to the next slide, please. Great. We also have a very long and rich history of working with partners and institutions that are really key actors in their local context, and supporting them in their work with marginalized populations, because we know that local actors know their communities best, such as yourselves, and know how to respond and support. So in Thailand, we're working with the Christian school system in Thailand to make child-safe schools. So we're working on the policies and structures to report any child protection incidents that might come up. We're working with teachers, training them on well-being of children and how to use nonviolent discipline techniques. On the US's southern border, we're working with shelters to help them identify their needs. There's been a proliferation of shelters across the whole border, now more than 30. We provide technical support, kits, warm blankets for people that are passing through the shelters. We're also working with refugee-led organizations, such as our work with STARS in Egypt, which is a refugee-led organization that provides frontline services to a variety of different populations, including GBV survivors. The next slide, please. And we are also doing learning activities. So we're conducting research with children of incarcerated parents. There are more than 2 million children in Latin America that are affected by incarceration, and they experience a lot of violence, social stigma, exclusion that's really affecting their lives and well-being. So we're conducting research to be able to advocate in different countries in Latin America and regionally to really address this pressing problem of this social exclusion and marginalization of children and families who are affected by incarceration. We're also doing research on the power and impact of local faith leaders, especially in the response to migration from Venezuela. And we undertook protection monitoring activities on the southern border, which is really an effort to collect data and information to understand the type of risks and violations or human rights violations that folks are facing. We're also conducting research with Roma adults on adverse childhood experiences and also with unaccompanied children on the Balkan route. All right, next I'll pass over to my colleague Auxi.
Thank you, Danielle. So I'm Auxiliadora, Auxi. I am part of the technical unit team as a protection specialist, and I also serve US programs and international programs within CWS. So thank you. So now we share a little bit about the core definitions about what protection means and how is CWS working around protection. So now we will have like a couple slides where we're going to reflect on some guiding questions on practical ways and perspectives around how to incorporate these protection principles. But we also want to have a time at the end to learn on how are you incorporating these principles, because as Danielle mentioned, protection can be an abstract concept or definition. And a lot of what we do in protection, we do it because we're learning from how others are doing it. So we also will have to have a space to learn on how are you doing this. So what does incorporating protection principle mean? So incorporating protection principles is a process. It's a process of reflecting on how we can better serve the people we are working with by having standards. It's having standards that seek safety, having standards that promote meaningful access. It's also having standards that facilitate the people we serve with the opportunity to provide feedback to us and provide feedback and report concerns to us or to authorities. So it's having those open channels and open conversation with the people we serve, but having an intentional opportunity for them to access to us. It's also having facilitating spaces for the people we serve to participate and empower them. So when we start this process of incorporating protection principle, the first question that we ask ourselves too as CWS, how are we being intentional on incorporating these principles? And in the couple slides, we will reflect on some of practical perspective on how to have some protection standard and how to have protection as a framework of working. Next, please. So as we mentioned, protection is about being safe. It's about being a safe organization. And what does being a safe organization mean? So it's about being intention about doing no harm. And it's about reflecting that some of our actions might unintentional put people at risk or increase their vulnerability. So even if we don't want, sometimes we can cause harm unintentionally. So it's understanding that harm can happen with any action, even good actions can cause harm. And having this principle of no harm as a foundation would allow us to reflect about it and to mitigate and prevent some of those harms. So it's understanding that everyone can cause harm unintentionally and reflecting about our activities, the type of activities that we do, the places where we are engaging with the communities we are serving, and who is engaging with the community, especially those that can be considered to be at higher risk. There are some tools that can help us assess the risk of our actions, and there are some tools also that can help us mitigate and prevent some of those harms. And it is important to understand that every organization, whether it's a community-based organization, faith-based organization, or NGO working with people in vulnerable conditions or people that can be considered to have higher risk of experience any type of human violations or violence, is responsible for setting safety standards. And how do we set some safety standards? So it can be through code of conducts, it can be through policy procedures, and it can be just by having these spaces of reflecting of the work that we're doing and how are we engaging in a safe way with the communities we are serving. So a couple questions in each of the slides, we have a couple questions that we want to come back at the end and learn from you. How are we setting some standards for being a safe organization? Do we have safeguarding policies in place? Do we have code of conducts? Are we analyzing the risk of our actions? What are some good practices that you have in place and we can share with others to strengthen us as a safe organizations? You can start by putting some of these answers if you want in the chat, but we can also have a discussion at the end. We will have, I think, 10 to 15 minutes to share more. Next, please. So this is a visual that can help us guide us. It's a simple visual that can help us guide us when thinking about being a safe organization. So we have as a foundation, the principle of no harm. And it is important to understand that our role as an organization, like everybody, we connect in a different way in the community. So it is important to understand our role as an organization and also as a staff. So some of the staff or volunteers we are working with might have different roles or responsibilities in the community. And especially when some of them can be even considered mandated reports. So understanding the roles that we play in the community and the people we're working with is very important. It is also important to understand that each organization might face different risks when interacting with people we serve. And we have different roles and responsibility when understanding those risks. Also, as I mentioned, different staff and volunteers might have different roles too. And understanding those and setting expectations and standards according to those roles is critical when we start working around our policies, around our procedures, code of conducts. And we want that these policies and procedures respond to our unique context. So each organization has a unique kind of risk and roles and responsibilities. So it is important also to reflect and how are we current managing concerns when we receive a concern from the people we're serving related to our staff or to our volunteer. How are we managing those concerns? Or when we receive a feedback, it could be a positive feedback of our work or a feedback that can help us improve our work. How are we managing those feedbacks are some of the questions that we can ask ourselves. How do we report an abuse if someone report an abuse to us? How do we connect with the authorities or the formal system? Do we have procedures in place? Who will receive this concern? Who will be informed? How do we will connect with the authorities if it is applicable? How do we refer to other organizations who are specialized with services? How do we connect with organizations that work with domestic violence or that work with children at risk or with youth at risk? These are just like some of the questions that we can ask ourselves when reflecting on our role, on our risk, and with developing policies and procedures in case we don't have it. It is also important, so policy and procedures is just the starting point, right? But we need to train our staff and our volunteers, and it also requires sometimes even we have to reflect about our beliefs, about our attitudes and behaviors. So sometimes it implies like a bigger change, like a cultural change, some people might say, because it's reflecting on how our behaviors and attitudes also can be put in people we serve at higher risk. So sometimes it can be in an organizational shift when we start this process of analyzing, are we a safe organization, or where we are in becoming a safe organization. So it might start with having policies and procedures in place and then trainings. But when we start implementing these processes and policies, we will face that we might have other challenges to work in like cultural change, behavioral change, attitude change. Next, please. So this is the first standard, is about being safe. The second standard that we introduce is about meaningful access. So in order people to have a meaningful access, we need to understand that people face different type of barriers. People have different needs, and access to service has to be according and in proportion to those needs. So we need to understand that different groups face particular barriers. So women might face particular barriers, children, different type of minorities. So understanding this and ensuring that we engage in conversation and participation with a variety of groups that we're working, it will be important to guarantee that we have meaningful access. And we can see in the slides, we have different type of barriers that people can face. We have physical barriers, informational, social barriers like stigma and shame, psychological like fear and anxiety. Cultural norms can be barriers at sometimes, and we have others like distrust of the services. Hopelessness can be another barrier. So understanding, talking with people and understanding what are some of the barriers that they are facing, and depending of the group, it will be crucial to really assure that people is having meaningful access. And here are some common strategies to addressing those barriers. So the first one is mapping and assessing the barriers, and sometimes there are tools available, but we can also create our own tools to assess these barriers. Community engagement, participation, and empowerment, and providing accessibility and reasonable accommodation and gender norm transformation are just some of the strategies to address these barriers. So right now, what are some common barriers that people you work with face when accessing services? Do you know what barriers are? Can you share some of them? Are these barriers different from women than for men, or from children, or different groups? Do you have that information? And also, if you can share, please feel free to share in the chat. If not, we will talk at the end. Which groups have more challenges in accessing services? So when we answer these questions, we might sometimes reflect that maybe the way that we are engaging with the communities or the strategies that we are using might need to have some change. So this sometimes will affect the type of activities that we're doing. It can also affect where are we providing the services and how are we providing the services. So this understanding of the barriers, it will be key to really have a deep connections with the people we're working with and serving. Next, please. The next principle that we share is about collecting feedback. And collecting feedback is a path that keeps us accountable. It keeps us as being a transparent organization, and it is a process of continuous learning, because feedback, if we have an open channel to receive feedback, so it's a process, that a cycle of learning that never ends, because people will provide us feedbacks on how to improve, and it will help us to be in a continuous process of improving. Is having mechanisms in place to collect feedbacks that are mechanisms that are safe and are confidential. It is also important not just to have the mechanism in place, but also to respond to those feedback. We need to have people who will analyze those feedback, and we will respond to that feedback. And it's also important to learn with the feedback that we are receiving. It's a way that is going to keep us grounded to the needs of the people that we are serving it. After setting this mechanism, it is important to train staff on how to use the feedback and how to manage the feedback mechanism in a safe and confidential way. Some principles that are key when having or establishing feedback mechanisms are having a survivor-centered approach, and there are a couple trainings available about that. Trauma-informed approach, and also having feedback mechanisms that are accessible, confidential, impartial, and safe. If we work with children, so the mechanism will be different. It has to be child friendly. So also it's important to, depending of the groups that we're working with, the mechanism might look different. If we work with people who don't know how to read or who speak a different language, so the mechanisms will look different depending of the people we work with. So it's important, as always in this process, for a protection, when having a protection lens, we will always be engaging with the community and letting the community and the people we're serving to tell us what is the best way to work with them. Next, please. We're almost there. And a key element of working with the protection lens is, as we mentioned at the beginning, is understanding our role. And if people might come with concerns or might report us things, it doesn't mean that we are the one who are going to provide the protection, or we as an organization are the one who are going to provide medical, legal, or psychological services. Sometimes we do provide some of those services, like psychological or legal, but sometimes, the majority of times, we do not provide those services. So having a mapping of all the services available in the community, and organizations that work with the type of populations or groups we are working. So if we are working with people who the majority people speak in Spanish, so we might look for medical facilities or psychological support who understand or talks in Spanish or speak the language Spanish. So we having a mapping of all the services available, that not just available, but that responds and work with the type of population that we are working, it's key. And it's not just having the mapping, it's also sometimes having the relations, visit those services, talk about the groups we are serving and how we can better engage with those services to provide meaningful access to the people we are working with. So some here are just key services that we could or should have map in the communities we are working with: medical service, mental health services, legal, women's social and economical empowerment groups, domestic violence support groups, youth development groups like sports, mentorship, psychosocial support for youth, bullying prevention, and others, child care services, child care system, how we connect with child first system, and what is our role and what is our responsibility. And the prevention of violence services are just some of the key considerations that we must have. And there are also tools on how to map those services. Sometimes they are already mapped in the community. Sometimes other partners that we are working already have a map, and we might just need to make sure that we have those relations, connections, that the information is still valid, and also that those are really working with the communities we are serving. So I think we're going to be just in time, as we said, to have a conversation. So next, so we are proposing 3 key steps when talking and working around protection. So if you as an organization wants to be more intentionally about mainstreaming this protection principles, so we are proposing this 3 key steps. Like, you can create, if you don't have a code of conduct or safe internal policy, and if you do have, you can update it. We recently, as an organization, updated our child safeguarding policy, for example. So sometimes laws change, sometimes our roles and responsibilities change because we are working in new programs, or we are working with a different group or population that we were not working before. or we are working in a new community. So sometimes those things will help us really respond to the people we're working with. So sometimes if we have a code of conduct, sometimes we might need to update it. So that's just one example of the things that we can do just to start this process of being a safer organization for the people we work with. It's also to train our staff, to train our volunteers on how to serve and work with population that can be at higher risk, how to have a survivor-centered approach, how to have a trauma-informed approach. What does it mean to have a child protection lens? How do we engage with child protection situation or incidents are some of the trainings that we can look for, and there are a lot of there that are available and that are for free that we can engage on. And number 3 is how can we ensure that the people we are working with have the opportunity to give feedback on the services that we are providing. So this is key because this, as we have mentioned a lot, this would help us improve the work that we're doing. That's will also keep us accountable, and it will also help us know that if we are being a safe organization or not, if our staff is being safe or behaving in a safe way with the communities we're serving. So having in this opportunity for the people to provide feedback, it will be, like sometimes people say, a game changer in the work that we do, and having a protection lens as a mainstreaming in our work. So thank you. And now we will open, Danielle, I think we're ready to open for reflections, sharing best practice. So these are just some perspective on how to really have a protection lens in the work that we do, but you could be doing other things, or you can also share the things that are working in your community, and maybe some things that are not working and we shouldn't do, or you also any questions for Danielle or for me. So thank you.
And you can feel free to go off mute or throw things into the chat. We have a couple compliments in the chat as well for you all to review as well. And if you would like connected, feel free to throw your email in the chat, and we can make sure that you get connected, or we can help get any of your questions or feedback to the appropriate person. Give it a few seconds here in case anyone would like to go off mute for a question or any feedback for Oxy or Danielle. And Ruben, can we move back to the action step slide super quick?
And we have Silvana there after, yeah.
Just in case there are any questions or any points of clarification or any conversations based off of some of these action steps. I know that's really what we're aiming for out of these sessions, is to sort of have some actionable items and some ways we can actually get involved and bring these to the communities that you all are in. So wanted to provide that in case there's any comment or feedback from this.
So thanks, Auxi and Danielle, for this presentation. Even as we are part of the same team, but I always learn something new when we're having these meetings, as we talk about them, and to talk about these topics in a different way for a different group of stakeholders and partners and collaborators. One question I have is because I myself sit in groups that are not necessarily that are more looking at client services or coalitions or advocacy, And I try to translate these general principles or protection principles in a way that others can be engaged, whether it's people that have a lot of knowledge or little knowledge of how this is done. Could both of you or either of you provide with a few tips, just 2 or 3, of how we can be engaged when we are not like creating SOPs or doing more in-depth technical work, but we can also be engaged with the overall principles of protection. Let me know if you need further clarification on my question. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to
Did I
start
go?
then? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
okay.
I'll start. Thanks, Silvana. And yeah, I think it's a really good question. And the response I would give is that the first step is to start asking questions, right? To think about how to understand what organization or coalition you're part of, how are they thinking about these things? Do you ask, do we have a code of conduct? What training, has our groups been offered? Ask a little bit about what are some of the risks that we're seeing among the folks that we're working with and the populations, and do we feel equipped? Engage in that reflection, I think, is a very first step, and just asking ourselves to think through it. Actually, I'll pass to you.
Yeah, one of the things, yes, complementing what Danielle said, is understanding your role as a person in the organization and the role of your organization, as we mentioned. And we are part of a community, we are part of a system, and each organization has a different role that plays in the community. So understanding that role and understanding your role also, it's key. And asking, I think the key is asking what if what I'm doing could put people at more risk. I think that's like the basic question, or how uploading a photo can put someone at a higher risk. Do I have a permission to upload this photo? Does this person provide consent? Is this a sensitive photo, for example, something like sometimes we don't think, is this a sensitive photo? Are we providing identification information? Are we providing the name, the location, and this could put a higher risk of? So every action that we engage with other people, the people we are serving, and it could be the people directly, or sometimes it can be their information. It can be their photo or the information. So we just have to ask about the regulations that we have as an organization, code of conduct, policies, and the legal framework in the country, but also ask, if you don't know, just could I be putting this person at risk? And if I don't know, who can I ask in my organization? And this person might provide support around that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or feedback for our 2 presenters today? All right.
Yeah, I don't see any
Sounds
other
like
questions, but thank you for the people who are writing about connecting or starting partnerships. So thank you for all those feedbacks in the chat.
great. Any last minute things from the 2 of you before we go ahead and close out here? You guys, I think, covered some wonderful information here. So fantastic. But I wanted to give you the floor in case there are any final thoughts from the 2 of you.
I would just say we all play a role. We all play a role in working with communities that are at risk. And I just want to thank you all for joining and being part of that support, welcoming. And yeah, I hope that this can be, a continued conversation. Certainly, I would be very happy to have that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. We are open if you want to keep sharing your best practices or learning about other best practices. Maybe you already started the process of being intentionally of having protection principles embedded, but if not, we can, it's also an open conversation. So we are here also open to be part of that process.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Asi and Danielle, for this incredible information and presentation. And thank you all for joining us today as well, and for your feedback, both in the chat and live and in person. Again, our next session for Partner with Us will be on April 10th, Rising Together, Empowering Women Globally, and we will send out some more information about that. But in the meantime, expect an email tomorrow from myself regarding all things this presentation. We'll have a recording made available. This will also be made available on YouTube as well, in case you'd like to share it out with any of your contacts. And if you are interested in getting in contact with Asi or Danielle, please let me know, and I can go ahead and connect you or to whomever the correct person is under the CWS umbrella. But otherwise, we will go ahead and close out today. Thank you both for a wonderful presentation. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all at our next session. Thank you.